As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going, better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains, haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. I'm never gonna give up.
You're listening to the Tom Ficklin Show on WNHHLP 103.5 FM, your home for community radio.
Right. Welcome, New Haven. Welcome, the world. Thank you, 103 FM, 103.5 FM, New Haven. Thank you for this opportunity. Thank you, Tom Ficklin. Thank you, Harry, for engineering our show. Today, we've got a really important show to bring you. We have been following a path of education reform that has spent over $3 trillion in just the past 12 years in this nation. Started with No Child Left Behind, went to Race to the Top, Every Student Succeeds, and we just keep following these trends that focus primarily on using test scores to motivate and engage and raise these test scores, despite the fact that researchers have told them that we have 100 years of data that shows that focusing on those things does not raise the test scores of your students. But anyway, so we begin with this organization that we have today. I think it's time we remind people that there's an organization in the country, United to Save Our Schools, and it really began in 2011. They put together a conference, a rally, and a march protesting these kinds of emphasis on standardized testing as the sole measure of school reform, inequity. And in that 2011, they brought 12,000 people to Washington, D.C. They had a conference, they had a rally, they had a march. They brought incredible educators, Diane Ravitch, Nancy Carlson Page, Jonathan Colzel. There were so many that it's just, even Matt Damon came to this event. And it started a whole kind of movement going on, and many other groups came out. But today I want to let people know that the United to Save Our Schools, since 2011, has never stopped working where they have a model that inform, educate, and help people to collaborate on acting, to take action, to fight misguided policies and failed reforms in our schools. So today I have two of our shining stars from that group, Becky Smith, and she'll introduce herself, and then Denisha Jones, who's been a guest on this show before. So Becky, how about we start with you? Tell us who you are and what you do, what's your passions?
Hi, Jesse. Thanks. It's good to be here talking with you all this morning. So I'm Dr. Becky Noel Smith. I currently reside in California. I have been an educational activist, I guess I would say. Actually, the Save Our Schools March event in DC was the first one I ever attended, and really set the ball rolling for me. I, as a former educator at that point in time, and then a mother, was just driven mad by what I had experienced as a public school teacher, the absurdities that I had witnessed. And so that led to a good decade of educational activism and eventually grad school. And now I'm a philosopher of education, and I teach future teachers about my own perspective, through my own experiences, what I have witnessed over the last 22 years as an educator, and try to help folks move out into the schools and create classroom spaces and learning communities that are democratic and socially just.
Excellent. All right. And so you were there on that first event. Oh my gosh. And you were there with us in Selma. You've been there. I don't know. I don't think you even have a life outside of United to Save Us.
The roots run deep at this point. The roots run deep at this point.
Dr. Jones, could you take us on your journey?
Thanks, Jesse. It's good to be back. My name is Dr. Denisha Jones. I Right now, I'm the executive director of Defending the Early Years, which is a nonprofit group that actually got its origins after that 2011 rally as well. And I'm also a faculty member at Sarah Lawrence College in the Art of Teaching program at Howard University School of Education. I was also like Becky at that first event. And so what was really interesting was that I had lived in DC. I did my undergrad at University of District of Columbia. I lived in DC up until 2004. I taught kindergarten. My first job was at kindergarten at Peabody Capitol Hill Cluster School on the Capitol Hill. And then I left to go to grad school. And then after grad school, I was in California. So I was just getting ready to come back to DC in 2011. I had just moved back that summer. I was taking a fellowship year at Howard University. That's how I got involved with them. And I had started getting active in protests in San Diego, but it wasn't around education, right? But if we remember what was happening, there was a lot happening just in general, right? The governor of Wisconsin was like pissing everybody off, and like people were protesting, and austerity budget cuts against workers, right? So I remember going to a few protests. And then I come back to DC and everyone's talking about Save Our Schools and this huge rally. And I just said, I got to go check this out. I'm back home, what felt like home. And there was this massive event. I remember just meeting so many people there. I met Morna McDermott. She had that amazing cemetery display of like how No Child Left Behind had killed all the things, right? Killed creativity, killed things. It's one of the best things I remember. I still have photos of it. I connected with folks from the COE, the Council for Opportunity of Education, and TRIO programs, right? And TRIO is my life, right? I was Upper Bound, I was McNair Scholar. TRIO is why I'm Dr. Jones today. And yeah, as I mentioned, like all of the groups after that came, right? In 2011, Save Our Schools was organizing this event, but none of the other groups had existed then. Badass Teachers, United Opt Out, Network for Public Education, Defending the Early Years, they all formed within the next 2 years after that monumental event in 2011. And I remember going to the conference part at American University, hearing Jonathan Koval speak, seeing documentary. I think that's the first time I saw the documentary about the one against Waiting for Superman. I think it aired there as well too, with Brian Jones and the New York folks as well too. The inconvenient truth behind Waiting for Superman. Yeah. And it was amazing. And like, it changed my life. Like I became an education justice activist after that and got involved with all of those organizations and Save Our Schools. I went to a couple planning meetings for that event before it actually happened, because I was back home and trying to like get involved. And I remember meeting Beth, right? And other folks. And I think Jesse, you as well. And yeah, it just really, we became little did we know where we'd end up almost, what was that? 12 years later?
And when people ask me a little bit about, they'll say, well, how long have you been doing this? And I tell them that as long as every child in our public schools doesn't have access to a high quality, equitable education, then that's how long I've been doing it, and that's how long I'll continue to do it. United to Save Our Schools is definitely unique because in the beginning, back then, and we've got a lot of updates going on, but back then it was really, we took on these high stakes assessment drive-in. We spent $250 million, $1 trillion rather, sorry. So that's $250 billion on testing and new curriculums that all failed. The promise of NCOB was that every child would be a reader by January 1st, 2014. Not only they would be a reader at grade level, they would do math at grade level, and they would write at grade level. That was the promise. We spent $1.2 trillion on that, and it failed. And nobody went to jail, and nobody got their hands slapped in that time. But we would continue. But United to Save Our Schools did that. And we began as quickly to give people the information, because some of you know us as Save Our Schools. And we made a transition to United to Save Our Schools because we started realizing from just what Dr. Jones and Dr. Smith, you were talking about, all these other groups that grew up out of that, we learned that no one needed to take the lead in this struggle. We needed to have a collaborative effort. And so we became United to Save Our Schools. Those are things, memories that I want to think before we start on our current campaign. Becky, you've been to Selma with us at the Education Summit. And I remember one year you were down there. I think you brought all your children, and we were making balloon puppets and all kinds of things. And you said, we've got to be there. We got to have stuff for kids. Could you tell us, because in Selma, is where United to Save Our Schools connected to Reverend Barber from the
Yeah.
Moral Mondays campaign. So can you tell us a little bit about that experience? Because people don't know. They'll say, well, what were you doing in all those years? I'm saying, well, I think I've been to Selma like 5 or 6 times to the Education Summit. Were you there? But you were there. So tell us about your experience.
Yeah. So at that point in time, I was working on my PhD at the University of Alabama. So I was just up the road from Selma. And one of the things about Uniting to Save Our Schools is we've done pre-COVID, we did actions all over the country. You know, we'd been up to New York. We'd done things in DC. We were at the 50th anniversary march in Washington, DC. And then we also were at the 50th anniversary of the Bridge Crossing Jubilee in Selma, Alabama, at the Education Summit, which gave us the opportunity to connect, as Jesse said, connect with Reverend Barber and the Moral Mondays movement, and to see how I think this is something we all had intuitively known. We weren't. This wasn't new to us necessarily, but the Moral Mondays movement really helped us connect it to the broader. I mean, this is a broad social problem. This isn't just about schooling. This isn't just about education. This is about well-being for human beings, humane spaces, humane support systems, of which public schooling is an absolute foundation. So I will refer people to, as a result of broadening our scope and our focus, we did draft a Uniting to Save Our Schools platform for public education, which highlights the broad ways in which public schools are so vital to the well-being. You know, we advocate for public education as a human and civil right, right? You know, arguing for fair and equitable education for all, safe, socially and racially just public schools are among some of the tenets that drive the work that we do. And we have a pretty extensive platform that we've laid out online that guides all of our work. But really, I think we can point back to the massive numbers of people, the collaboration and the conversations that we had in Selma, especially with Reverend Barber, who, if you're not familiar with Reverend Barber, he is powerhouse and really advocating for a better, an overall better world for everybody, a more humane way of being and supporting one another. But yeah, so Selma was where we made those connections. And yes, as Jesse said, I always brought my child. I always brought my child to all of our activities because I thought, you know, democracy is a practice that children need to be brought into as well. In fact, I can point back to Birmingham and the protests in Birmingham, the children's march in Birmingham, which was hugely influential and probably has left a significant visual mark on most of our memories from the footage that we've seen of the young children, fire hoses and dogs, and the power of that particular movement that was spearheaded by Dr. King, Shuttlesworth, and Abernathy. But yeah, so children came, and yeah, I always advocated for doing something to keep the kids entertained while we were there, to try to make it festive, not a, you know, something that the children could also enjoy being part of. And I think Jesse was always fascinated by the balloon animal.
You were incredible. They were pulling a wagon. You were one of the most popular events on the bridge crossing for kids, because families in Selma on the Jubilee Day, the bridge crossing day, I mean, thousands of people come and commemorate that bridge crossing. And that bridge crossing is full of famous people. We've had Obama, we've had Clinton, we've had Biden, we have Reverend Barber, John Lewis, Congressman John Lewis was on every bridge crossing. And I was there on his last bridge crossing when we were there with some SOS members on that United to Save Our Schools members. And I remember that he stopped in the middle of the bridge. Everything stopped. Now, we were talking 20,000 people. The Edmund Pettus Bridge is a pretty small bridge. And if you can stop that bridge, it stops things for blocks down. And he gave a CNN sort of little talk over there. And we were just like mesmerized in that sense. So Selma is the place that you get to see all the famous voices in the civil rights movement. And yes, you're right. Selma was that venture. Reverend Barber, I went to his services, I went to his organizing committee, and Barber really helped me understand that you're not going to improve our public schools until you improve every aspect of life. If you want to fight for better public schools, you have to fight for better health care. You have to fight for better wages. You have to fight for voting rights. And I remember him waking us up, and United to Save Our Schools has jumped right on, which brings me, I need to bring Denisha, because Denisha at Howard, we had an event that brought Reverend Barber to Washington, D.C. And we had one of the best conferences I have ever attended. Denisha, could you tell us about what United to Save Our Schools and the connection to Howard was?
Yeah, so 5 years later, so 2016, and we were like, we need to do it up again. And I was still at Howard University teaching in the School of Education, and we decided that was the place to be. And reached out to the dean at the time. She had found out about my activism work, and I was keeping it on the hush hush because I really didn't know. And I remember the first United opt out. So we are like we're going to be in front of the Department of Ed, and I wasn't like saying anything. And we go into this faculty meeting, and her name was Leslie Fenwick. She was the dean at the time. And she was like, Dr. Jones, we need to talk about drop to. This is amazing. I'm so glad Howard represented. And I was like, ooh, I didn't know this was a good thing, right? So she was actually transitioning out of her deanship at around 2016, but she did lend a hand to helping us get the space at Howard University. So we did our 5-year anniversary of Saving Our Schools March, and back in DC at Howard this time, we did have Reverend Barber come. So we had the conference part that, I remember us having at American, now at Howard. We also had the rally and the march part on the Capitol. And so we did it was amazing. It was an amazing day. We had a ton of speakers. We had performances, so many people. Again, Jonathan Kozol was there. I remember hanging out with him for a little while. We had G2 Brown was there because he became really big in the movement. I know I got some New York City folks down. DJ Farrow was there doing hip hop workshops. We had so many people, and all of those groups were now 5 years into it. So they were all there participating in the movement. United Opt Out, Badass Teachers, Defending the Early Years, like all of us working together with Save Our Schools at that time. And it was really good. It was a really memorable time that we were able to come back, and it was sad that the fight wasn't over. I don't think it'll ever be over, but we were able to come back and keep it going. And so, yeah, that was 2016.
I remember there's a great picture. We have 3 exceptional Black educational activists. So we have Jamal Bowman, who's Congressman Jamal Bowman. Have a nice picture of them just standing together. Yoo-Hoo Williams, who I forget if he's the provost or vice president at one of the schools in Minnesota. I forget what university now. And we have Jesse Hagopian as well. And the 3 of them are looking at the monument. And it's just one of the great pictures, but it was incredible, the friendships that we did. We always had Barry Lane there. Barry Lane sings some kind of hallelujah song and stuff. And we had things, lots of Chicago teachers, Barbara Maldononi from the Massachusetts Teachers Association brought a bus down over there. But I remember that event distinctively. And we've been engaging and continuing the work in a different way. So it's hard to get people to, we had a group of teachers that came all the way from Detroit in 2015. They took a bus. I remember them getting off the bus, coming into the hotel, being dead tired and stuff, and then being fired up to go to the rally. And I was like, I'm too old. I don't think I could be doing that. I'd probably be falling asleep, but they were really fired up. But we started realizing, in terms of how much money and how much effort and airfare and all of this. And then we started switching to these critical dialogues. So, and we've had all kinds of critical dialogues with union people, with all kinds of, it's just amazing. And they're all on our webpage. So in the chat box, you can click on the Save Our Schools webpage to see our platform, to see events we do, current events, future events, all kinds of information. So I put it in the chat box, people. It's an amazing group, and you could get a newsletter following up kind of with us and follow us, and we'll let you know. But I really wanted to move into some of the current things. So last night we had a webinar, because everyone's talking the teacher shortage. Harry will say, hey, Dr. Turner, you've done a couple of shows on the teacher shortage. I think, Denisha, you were in one as well. And I've done it with teachers, I've done that. Last night, we had Dr. Santoro, I think it was, and talking about demoralizing teachers. Becky, could you tell us about that? And they're
Yeah,
free.
we had an amazing panel last night. We had Dr. Doris Santoro from Bowdoin College in Maine. We had Julia Hazel, who's the director of BIPOC Ed Leadership and Career Advancement in Portland, Maine. And then we had Olga Acosta Price, who's from George Washington University, who's director of Center for Health and Healthcare in Schools. And the topic last night was demoralization, which is different than burnout. Burnout is pretty much just exhaustion. And if you listen to the discourses around the teacher shortage right now, what we keep hearing is teachers are burning out, they're burning out, they're burning out. Yeah, of course they are, but that's not the foundation that's not the foundation that's crumbling underneath them. Folks like Doris, Julia, and Olga argue that that what's dismantling the profession right now is demoralization, which is essentially, educators go into the field. We work under the presumption that educators go into the field with a desire to do something good, to give back to their communities. It's not a self-serving field. And so the rewards of being in schooling spaces with children and with communities are the interactions, the human interactions that make us feel like we're contributing to a better world. And the complexities with demoralization is that constraints get put into place that start to prevent educators from being able to feel the intrinsic rewards of teaching. And that starts to slowly break down. I would argue certainly starts to break down our mental health, seeing the wear and tear of social neglect on the bodies of children and families, seeing the ways that our colleagues of color and our children of color are treated by and through the practices of an institution that are inherently rooted in racism and white supremacy, and how those types of things wear away at our moral fabric and make a lot of folks desire to leave the field because they can no longer handle not being able to access the moral good of the work that education, I think, can and should be. And so we had an amazing panel last night address these issues. And what's wonderful about it is Doris's work. She wrote a book called Demoralization, Why Good Teachers Leave the Profession They Love. I'm looking for it now. I'm trying to find it, make sure I got the title right. Published in 2018. It's a great book. Thank you, Denisha. It's a great book. And what's wonderful about it is her study in that book looked at veteran teachers. Now, see, typically what we hear is people leave the field within the first 4 years. But Doris looked at veteran teachers who had been at this for a long time, who had endured NCLB and Race to the Top and the types of reforms that Jesse mentioned early in the show, and looked at the veteran teachers who decided to stay and what it was that they did to do what she calls remoralize themselves. And all of it comes down to finding some sort of way to rechannel the moral good of our work, whether that be through social activism, whether that be greatly altering what we do in the classrooms, whether that be becoming more involved in the unions. But the key for everybody's survival, everybody's remoralization, was communal connection. Everybody had to find some sort of, the people that she researched, they all found some way to get outside the walls of their own classroom. Because for those of you who haven't taught before, teaching, particularly in elementary school, it can be unbelievably isolating. You're trapped in a room so in some schools, depending on where you are, you're trapped in a room all day with kids. You can't go to the bathroom, and then I know when I was teaching in Florida, we were really prohibited from doing things like we were going out for recess, so like it was very room centered. You're kind of trapped in this space and your nose is to the grindstone and you're working through things with kids. So it can be a really isolating experience. And so I think once teachers get their bearings about the work itself, within a classroom, I think that maybe then it opens up space for them to be able to branch out. And for Doris, according to Doris's research, this was a lot of what helped people remoralize themselves. So the book is really phenomenal. And then Julia talks about ways that demoralization influences educators of color, educators and staff of color in particular, because obviously there are different dynamics. She talked about the smog of racism and running up against these walls of whiteness and the problems that these create for educators of color. And then Olga, of course, talks about the ways similar to what we were talking about with Reverend Barber, about the need to really increase the support systems around the schools to make schools more vibrant places for humans who live and work inside the walls.
No, definitely. And you had mentioned quickly about, kids sitting in their chairs and not sometimes not even be able to go to the bathroom, all this kind of stuff. Before I asked Denisha some other stuff. Denisha, from defending the early years, certainly has a position on the power and the importance of play in our schools. Denisha, could you tell us, should we let kids play? Maybe we should just tie them down into those chairs, put some glue in there and tack them down and tell them sit, be quiet, and pay attention. What do you think?
No way, Jesse, not if we want them to be good, functional human beings. So I am a huge true play advocate, warrior for play. I think it can solve like 99% of our problems, the other 1% being people still need food and water, right? But like play can solve almost everything else, right? So, and it's interesting because you were talking earlier about the research about how the testing doesn't work, right? And even now we have new research on this, right? So folks out of Vanderbilt, Dale Farron is one of a team, right? They were in Vanderbilt College. They were working with the state of Tennessee to do the first ever randomized control study of preschool in state of Tennessee. So Tennessee opened up the preschool, but it still wasn't enough. So they had all these people applying to preschool in Tennessee, and half of them couldn't get in and half did. So that gave them a randomized control study, which is like the gold standard for research, right? So they said, okay, we're going to track the ones who went to preschool in Tennessee, and we're going to track the ones who didn't go to preschool in Tennessee. So the end of the pre-K year, those who went to preschool are doing great. And everyone's like, see, look, preschool's great. Okay. And the kindergarten, not looking so different here, right? The ones who didn't go to preschool are now catching up at the end of kindergarten. By the end of third grade, the kids who went to the preschool are doing worse than the kids who did not. And it continued on through sixth grade, both academically and behaviorally. So why is that happening? Dale decided to look at why. Because of academic preschools, that's why. The state-funded Tennessee preschools were academically focused, and children were getting a lot of teaching in skills, right? Like surface skills of letters and numbers, right? But they weren't getting the foundational skills through play, inquiry, storytelling, acting out, right? That's going to help you down the line. So yes, if you sit down a 4-year-old and you teach them nothing but letters and skills and numbers, they're going to know that. But that doesn't mean they're going to learn the harder stuff later, because they're missing out on all the high quality experiences that let you learn all that harder stuff later. And it's not being skilled and drilled to death on your letters and numbers out of context, right? And so that is, to me, has been, again, we know the data, but we have it right now in black and white, right? Like they're doing worse 6 years later in this study in Tennessee, right? Because the kids didn't get a chance to play if they were in a state-funded academic preschool, as opposed to the kids who did get to play in the other preschool at home. The kids who didn't go to preschool were mainly at home, and they do different skills at home, right? And she talked about economically secure families and how they focus on the underlying skills. I'll put a link to the blog she wrote for Defending the Early Years, where she has this good visual of an iceberg, right? And on the top are the surface skills that academic programs for young kids focus on. But on the bottom are all these deep underlying skills that you don't get from that. You get from hands-on experiences that most families of means tend to give to their children, but that we don't give to low-income children of color in the name of preparing them for kindergarten readiness, right? So no, if we just let the kids play And I mean, play for a long time, and it would do so much better, right? We would do so much better for kids, their emotional development, social development, physical, language, cognitive, all of that stuff would do so much better if we got rid of all the forced teaching, right? We're in these reading wars again with people, attacking reading and science of reading and all of this, right? But what we forget is that children need to be inner motivated to want to read and to hear stories. And that doesn't come from forcing them to read. It comes from being in a literate environment where people talk and tell stories and read to you, right? And so I can go on, but play is the way. Play is the way.
Play is the way, and it's perfect because while United to Save Our Schools has a whole spring campaign of talking about all these issues in standing up to failed education reforms and keeping and motivating teachers and helping children. But one of those things is the very nature of these high stakes assessments. So we have some webinars coming up on about high stakes assessment. Can you tell us a little bit about them? People, remember, they're free. Just go to the link we put in the chat or email me and I'll send it to you. But it will be enlightening. Could you tell us a little bit about the anti-high stakes assessment group or webinars?
Yeah, I'm happy to offer up. So we've this school year, I guess we'll consider it a school year, we've been doing a series of webinars called Challenging the Latest Attacks on Education and Educators. Denisha did one back in October for us on moral injury and professional solidarity. And then obviously we had the one last night on demoralization. And on February 8th, we have examining the moral injuries and oppressive impacts of high stakes testing. And that particular, we've got a lot of panelists on that one, which is Dr. Wayne Au, who some of you may know, has written some wonderful books critiquing the historical issues with high stakes testing. He's out of University of Washington. As Jesse mentioned earlier, Congressman Jamal Bowman is going to be there. Harry Fetter from Fair Test is going to be there. Fair Test has been around for a few decades now, arguing for fair and equitable testing approach or assessment approaches. Deborah McCarthy, who is vice president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association, and then of course powerhouse Dr. Angela Valenzuela, who's coming in from University of Texas at Austin, who has written extensively on the problems of testing and language and culture and how the biases that are written into the tests. So that one is going to be facilitated by our own Ricardo Rosa, who will be taking the reins on that one. So again, that's February 8th from 7 to 8:30 Eastern. It's a Zoom webinar, so you're welcome to register for free online.
And we'll put that link for the registration in the box. And the reason Ricardo Rosa would have been with us today, but he's in Bedford, Massachusetts, kicking off the campaign for fighting the emphasis on high stakes assessment in Massachusetts. I wanted to also think about one of the things that when we look at the Save Our Schools platform, which people can look at the link, our platform supports a diverse education, diverse literature, embracing the identities and the communities of the children who come to our school. And I wanted to ask both of you, and I'll start with Denisha. Everybody's been paying attention to Governor Ron DeSantis in Florida. And as we pay attention to him, his attacks on what he's calling woke teachers, his rejection of an advanced placement Black history course, his bill questioning, anything that has to do with gender identity in schools, things like that. And I have a number of Florida teachers who have emailed me recently saying they're leaving the state. So Denisha, maybe we'll start with you, and then Becky will do the same. I'm wondering, I'm going to tell you right now, my teachers our state used to graduate more teachers than we could hire in the state. And Florida was one of the places to go. I haven't had a teacher in our program want to go to Florida in 2 years. So could you tell us, how does that make teachers feel? But Denisha, I'm going to kind of put you on the spot and say, how does that make teachers of color feel? Would
Well,
Florida be an attractive place? Or some our teachers before, also our teachers who can be an LGBTQ teacher. How can I be that teacher and not be allowed to mention it?
yeah,
Can you
I mean, I
share
think
that?
I think the teachers feel very much like that they're no longer allowed to be who they are in the classroom. It's not a safe space, right? I think Florida is not a safe space for people of color, specifically Black people, for people who are LGBTQ identifying, or just allies, right? Like, I wouldn't feel safe there as a heterosexual person just because I'm an ally, right, to the LGBTQ people, and it's not safe to be there, right? And so I think what's coming up and what's really happening here is that what we're seeing is this idea that states have a right to limit, right? We saw so much growth in understanding anti-racist work, right, after the murder of George Floyd. Like, we have to back up and see what was happening in this country, right? So in the middle of a pandemic in 2020, the world watched police officers murder a Black man on TV while he screamed in his last dying breath for his mother. And it galvanized the country to that there were protests in every major city in the United States for that weekend, and sustained protests for months in places like Seattle, right? And I think that point gets missed out. All the books were flying off the shelf. You couldn't find an anti-racist book to save your life. People were sending out statements. They were like, enough is enough. Black Lives Matter. We were finally seeing movement in this area. And then in the drop of a dime, we get Trump and the 17 whatever commission. We get attacks on CRT, attacks on legislation, and Ron DeSantis running rampant with it in Florida, right? So this is what Carol White calls the white lash, right? The backlash to Black advancement, right? White rage, right? As she calls it. Carol Anderson, I'm sorry, that's her name. Carol Anderson and the white rage, right? And so we see any type of advancement, and this is the backlash. And it's growing, and it's concerning because now it's being legislated. So think about what's happening in Florida to teachers. If I am a teacher and I teach something that makes a white child feel uncomfortable, their parents can sue me and I can lose my teaching license in the state of Florida for making a child feel uncomfortable because of something I said in a lesson. That is like the crux of how they're going after teachers. So they talk about they're protecting employees and families, but they're only protecting whiteness. They're making it impossible to challenge whiteness in any sense, right? To say anything. And think about uncomfortableness and how that comes up with teaching, right? I just told my students, you ever see a child watch those videos of like the Sarah McLachlan and the animal abuse, right? Like, every parent will tell you, oh my God, my kid wants to go save the animals now. They see this infomercial and their hearts are breaking. Yet I don't see anybody throwing Sarah McLachlan in jail because she's making these videos that are making kids feel uncomfortable, right? Because animal abuse is uncomfortable, and it's supposed to string at your heart and make you feel for these animals, so you donate money and you take care of them. Well, guess what? Racism is uncomfortable. White supremacy is uncomfortable. Talking about these things should make you feel uncomfortable, because that's the only way we're going to address it. And the state of Florida and other places, Ron DeSantis is not alone. He might be the loudest one in the room right now, but he's definitely not alone, are trying to make that illegal, right? For teachers, for educators to do what it takes to get people to get into that discomfort and move forward, right? If you study the stages of racial identity development, you learn that one of the second stages when white people get introduced to this work is that they get angry and they blame the victim. Half of the country is stuck in that stage. There are 4 more stages to go, people. If you would just get out of that anger and discomfort and move forward, you can get to a better place. But they are stuck there and they want to stay there. And that's what we're seeing in Florida. And that is a danger to all of the Black teachers, teachers of color, all of the LGBT teachers and their students. Think about a young Black child in Florida. Think about a young gay child or trans kid in Florida. They're being told that their identity is illegal, that their history doesn't matter, and it's not worth knowing. So yeah, it's a bad time to be a teacher in Florida. It always has been, and it's getting worse. It definitely is. Not only in Florida. Yes.
Yeah, and the sunshine isn't helping. That used to be an attraction for Connecticut teachers graduating from our program. That would be one of the attractions. Another place would be Texas, because there was plenty of work in Texas. And nobody's going to these states now. And Dr.
They're not going to teach in those states, right?
Right.
Who's going to go be a teacher there?
There are over 50,000 openings in Florida right now today. So just in case some teacher out there is desperate for a job, Florida is hiring. You just might not want to teach there. One of the things that and it comes back to things that in our platform, in the United to Save Our Schools platform, and you have 3 founding members on this radio show today. So we debated our platform for months and months and months, and we debated probably every year and stuff. But one of our platforms is an embracing of diversity in America, in that sense, and we have to acknowledge that more than half of our children are children coming from diverse communities in our public schools today. So that's one. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about mirrors, windows, and sliding doors. And she says all 3 of these things are powerful in the books we read. And so when you ban books, when you tell teachers their books have to be approved by a committee of some crazy people who want to ban anything that mentions anything that mentions diversity. But coming back to that point about these mirrors in literacy, I know when a child sees themselves in the book, a light bulb goes off. They work harder, they engage harder, they're motivated, and they want more. So that's one. The other is books are the way that we understand how to get along with others in our world, because that other guy, when Rudine Sims says windows, she means we're looking into the lives of others, and we get to learn about each other. So we need more of that, not less of that today. And then those ones, the sliding doors, and the sliding doors are the ones where you get to walk in the shoes of another person. And those are the books, the most powerful. Rudine Sims will talk about. They are transformational moments for readers. And what are those books? Those are the books like To Kill a Mockingbird. Those are the books, drama. Those are the books that talk about gender issues, about race, about Ruby Bridges, about Black Lives Matter. No, when Ron DeSantis made his announcement the other day, he specifically mentioned that he was rejecting the advanced placement Black History course because of Black Lives Matter, the 1619 Project, Black feminism, Black LGBT. He named a whole range of things that would be insulting to teachers. So I think it's important for our audience to know that when books connect to children personally, it motivates and engages and stimulates them, and it makes us all better in the world. So it's just a component over there. But tell me more. Where do you want to take this United to Save Our Schools? Are we going to have a rally? Are we going to have a new conference? Are we going to continue to do our critical discussions? What's the plan? Help me out. You're our young guns, so we could stick with you.
I think. I think I did want to follow up with something that Denisha had mentioned too about the capacity for now for the families of white children to be able to sue over the discomfort of the white children. I wonder if this will open up space actually to be flopped on its head, where it would be interesting to see a class action lawsuit come up against the public schools or DeSantis in general, right? For the discomfort of families of color and children of color in school, right? I think it would be an interesting thing. Have they opened up? Is it possible that a space could have opened that might come back to be utilized against them? One can only hope. That I know historically that is not the case, but
no.
And Jesse,
there is a lawsuit being filed against that for teachers, I think, are filing, but that's another avenue, right? And I think that's the legal argument that legal scholars are going to have to look at. Like, if you're making this an issue, so, people have joked around, well, algebra makes me uncomfortable. Can I sue the teacher, right? But yeah, no one's taking into account the comfort of Black children, the comfort of children of color, the comfort of LGBTQ children. And so it's an equal rights issue too. And that's the first challenge they're going, that it violates equal rights. But then on the flip end, you should be able to use the equal rights law to say that I am not comforted by Florida, right? I think in the long run, colleges around the world are going to have to decide whether Florida students are eligible. Are you really eligible to come to college somewhere else after the education you're receiving? I don't see that. And not saying in a way to keep them out, but like designing whole summer pre-college programs to really help college kids who graduated from Florida high school get on to college, because they are not college ready with that attitude. right? Unless they're going to stay in Florida, right? And so there's a lot of people talking about different ways. Mark Niacin has questioned whether pro college athletes around the country need to refuse to go play in Florida until some of this stuff is done. Use the power of their, what they bring to the table to say, no, I'm not going to go play in any college in Florida, right? And what other ways can we really think about challenging that? But yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how it plays out.
I remember that when we've had two, we joined. So United to Save Our Schools supports the actions of like-minded groups like United Opt Out, and they had two occupies in DC where we occupied the Department of Education, and BATS have had, Badass Teachers Association have also had two events in DC. And the last one, it might have been 2015, I'm not certain. It could have been 2016, but I remember I was doing one of the keynotes there, and we even put like Arnie Duncan and all these people on trial there, mock trial. We did that at that one. But my question, I looked at all the research and the data that showed these policies are failing our children, disengaging. And really, my question is, where's the humanity? So where's the humanity in an education system that won't allow you to be you? Won't allow us, it's just, I don't even know. It's frightening. But United to Save Our Schools is definitely in the mix. I'm thinking about, Denise, if you were thinking our connection with defending the early years. So I think you're the director of that group right now. Could you talk a little bit about how I don't know if one grew out of the other, we grew together. I don't know how 2011, that march on Washington would have had 12,000 people without Diane Ravitch, Nancy Carlson Page, and Matt Damon. Mm-hmm. I mean, that brought the press, came flying down. They didn't really come to Angela Venezuela was there. All people were there. But I know that when Matt Damon took that stage, every reporter in DC was there. And Arnie Duncan was on the phone begging him not to go. Don't go to the rally. Don't go. Come see me. But I want to, because I think one of the most powerful things about United to Save Our Schools is how it collaborates with others. And you're a good example. So could you tell us about the collaboration between Defend the Early Years and United to Save Our Schools?
Yeah, I mean, I think I just go by the dates, right? When were we founded? Defending the Early Years was founded in 2012, right? Badass Teachers, when were we started? 2012, right? All of these groups, United Opt Out, we all some of them met there and they've been thinking about it. But I think that event really brought people together who had these like-minded ideas and said, look, we can do this. And it energized people. And there was a spirit of getting together, right? And so, Nancy Carlson Page, Diane Levin were really thinking about, everyone was up in arms about, No Child Left Behind and Common Core, right? And all of these things. And from the perspective, we need to make sure that early childhood stays in this conversation, right? Because we know that most teachers are not teaching early childhood, right? And most people were thinking of testing, right? They weren't thinking of the pre-test that a first grader in kindergarten has to take, right? They're thinking of the actual test that starts in third grade, right? And so we wanted to make sure that we stayed a part of the conversation and said, yeah, if you're talking about boycotting standardized testing, we got to talk about the impact of standardized testing on young children, right? So looking at the Common Core state standards, they were awful for kindergarten. They still stated a 5-year-old should be able to write a paragraph. What are we talking about here? They're 5. Or the skills that are required are ridiculous. No 5-year-old should have to do that. Maybe some can, but none should have to, right? And so Nancy got together with Diane and they formed the organization and they started putting out different information about the harms of the standards, working with some giants in the field like Lillian Katz, right, and other folks, and working collaboratively with other folks. Fair Test, right, was doing a lot on testing. So they came to us and said, okay, well, let's talk about testing in young children. What's the impact? How do we get that going? So we have that fact sheet as well too, right? And so we were able to just work with all the organizations to make sure that the needs of early childhood children and their families and teachers stayed in the forefront of everybody else's movements. And so we could be that voice, right? So people would reach out to us and say, hey, how, can you come talk about the early childhood issues, whether it's testing or opting out? What does this mean for young children? What does this mean for early childhood teachers? And that was always been great about how we came together, that we looked out for whose story was not being told, right? When Journey for Justice started growing, looking at the issues impacting, marginalized Black families, we were quick, badass teachers, all of us wanting to reach out. How can we support Journey for Justice when they did the hunger strike with the teachers in diet, right? For the diet school that was being closed down, or their events as well too, their reports and their events on Capitol Hill as well. So we were doing all of that together. And so I think it's been great. Now I get to be the executive director, continuing working, just 2 years ago, 2020. So we were like, oh, look, COVID, no tests. And then we were like, oh, look, maybe we won't have tests anymore. And Biden went back on his promise to me at the public education forum that we had with Network for Public Education. If you remember, December 2019, so wild, right? No one can remember, but we had our first pre-presidential debate, right? They were all still running for the nomination, only focused on public education. So no charter lovers, none of those people. It was just public ed folks. And we had all of them. There were like 7, 8, 9, 10 Democratic nominations. And I got to ask Biden directly, would he end standardized testing? And he mumbled some long-winded answer, pretty much telling me I was preaching to the choir. Yes, yes, yes. So here we go then. COVID comes. Year 1, no testing. Year 2, oh my goodness, if there's no testing, it's over. And what do? They mandate testing, right? And so we all jumped in. All of a sudden, United Opt-out got some life in them. We came back. We met with Uniting to Save Our Schools, Defending the Earliers jumped on board, and we had anti-testing school toolkits out. We were moving, right? Trying to push people back in this area. So we've been able to work together in a lot of ways because we started with Save Our Schools in 2011, and Uniting to Save Our Schools continues to bring us together, which is really important.
That's excellent there. Becky, because we're coming on our last few minutes. Becky, could you tell us what your hopes are for in the direction of Uniting to Save Our Schools and our collaboration?
Well, back to the question that you asked in the chat and that you mentioned earlier, like, where is the humanity? The humanity is in acts of resistance and love against the power that keeps getting written into policies and practices that harm children, teachers, and communities, right? And so I think that one of the things that we've been good at and that I continue to look forward to are the very things that Denise is talking about. Collaborating with others, continually learning about the parts of education and well-being in general that maybe we've not considered. How do we broaden our own understandings of that? How do we add support behind, to Denise's point, right? Like, Journey for Justice has done unbelievable things, right? How do we amplify, how do we add our support behind them and help amplify the work that they're doing? How do I share this with my students? How do I share this with the community? And I feel like ultimately, it is in ever increasing amounts of collaboration and understanding and pushing toward more humane public schooling practices and policies that recognize and embrace the cultural and linguistic diversity of our students, of our children, of our communities, and such that they can be in a place where they feel they can be them unfearfully, unapologetically, and be embraced for being who they and their families and their ancestors are.
Definitely. So when I'm thinking about this where we're going in the future with United to Save Our Schools, it's as Becky said, is the humanity is in our resistance through acts of love. And how can we, how this nation spends $23 billion more a year on wealthy white schools than on schools of color and poor schools. This nation spends nearly $2 billion every single year on high stakes testing. And if they worked, we've been doing them for over 100 years. Don't you think we would have heard about it by now? I mean, I think so. So we're literally spending nearly $25 billion a year on policies that research is well documented, 100 years of research that says you will increase behavioral problems, you'll increase dropouts, you will actually increase failure in your schools by emphasizing that. And that's not to say we don't have to have some kind of assessment that's over there, but right now they're driving everything. And what are they driving? They're driving out first books. They're driving out, just everything that's humane and decent. A Black child, a brown child, an immigrant child, all children deserve to be valued and respected in our public schools. Fight the power, united to save our schools. Thank you, everyone.
As I got another rhyme, another rhythm for y'all to listen. I'm never quitting on my mission. I'ma roll with what I'm giving. Got some ambition, this new edition, filling positions. Looking at the void in myself and feeling what's missing. Better watch the way you going. Better go in the right direction. In the moment you stressing, but you gon' be counting blessings. And I know that for certain. Keep on working, open curtains. Haters swerving, cause they ain't ready for your final version. Whoa. I'm never gonna give up, give up. Fall down, I just gotta get up, yeah.